It's Thursday morning, about 10:30, a little before 10:30 here in the Denver area of Colorado, and I am drinking coffee from my mug that I got in Switzerland. So I got this mug, and at one point the handle had broken off, and so I put it back together. And so I occasionally use it, but not as often as I would otherwise. I'm a little concerned about the handle. So um, good day, Daniel. Thanks for joining me. So then, the coffee that I'm using right now, someone gave us a bunch of Nespresso little. Um, these are actually from. Oh, something went wrong with the transition there. I'm talking in the dark. Okay, so here we are. I am now. You can see me. I thought I was visible before. Uh, Off to a great start. So the coffee that I'm using right now, someone gave us these little Nespresso packages, and it's from Starbucks, but they're the little capsules to be put into a Nespresso machine. And so what I do is I just cut off the little aluminum top off of them and pour them into my espresso machine. And so I have two of the Nespresso packs to make one regular cup of coffee. So it might be a little stronger than I wanted it to be, but it tastes pretty good. So while I love fresh roasted coffee, while I love to grind my own beans, I am actually quite versatile and drink coffee a lot of different ways. But I was last week. We were at the Christian Worldview Film Festival, and while we were there, several people got baptized. And I actually, at one point, was chatting with some of the folks that got baptized, and just getting just a small glimpse into what's happening in someone's life. And so, what does your baptism mean to you? What does Christian baptism mean to you? It's a recurring theme right now in my life because of some of the things that I'm studying in preparation for the film documentary that I'm working on right now, where I'm actually working through some of the historical accounts of what happened in Switzerland again, and then also looking at what do Anabaptist churches of today actually still believe and practice. Amaya, thanks for joining me. And so here's what I wanted to do today is just I wanted to talk about baptisms, but instead of telling you everything that I think about baptisms, I want to tell you some stories about baptism. And I'm going to start with just reading the scripture from Romans 6. Romans 6, verse 1 says, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we who died to sin live any longer in it? Or do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life." All right, so this phrase where it says, "Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life." That concept right there has challenged a lot of believers over the years. And so I want to tell you a bit of a story. So first, let me set up this. I want to show you a place. When I was in Switzerland, hey, Joe from Ohio, and I'm going to actually now have to lose my chat screen for a minute while I show you. I want to take you to some place here in Switzerland. So give me just a moment and I will set this up. All right, so what I have is when we were in Switzerland, when we were driving around over there, wherever we went, we would see signs. It took me a couple of days, actually, maybe longer, to discover that many times what I'm used to from an American perspective was I was always looking for, I wanted road numbers if I was going anywhere. And a lot of times in Switzerland, instead of road numbers, it would have on the sign, it would have the biggest city off in some direction. And then it would have the smaller cities underneath. So you would figure out, if you're trying to go to a small village, you would look for what was beyond the village and look for the biggest thing on the other side of the village, and then you would follow that sign for that. But as you got closer, it would start listing the smaller villages, and then you'd be, that's where I want to go. And so instead of looking for all the road numbers and everything, you just started following the signs toward places. At least that's what I had to do while I was there, and it helped me so much once I figured that out. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up where you can see me up in the corner here, and also see my screen share from the other side. So here is me looking at plain old Google Maps, okay? And so over in Switzerland is where I want to head this morning and look at some stories over here. So here we are looking at Europe. Zoom in a little bit on Switzerland here, and off over here, right here, St. Gallen. That's where I want to go to. So if you zoom in kind of close, if you look at St. Gallen itself, it has this picture of this huge church building that's here, and that's actually where I'm wanting to go, is right here in St. Gallen. I want to go to right here. This is the Abbey of St. Gallen. So let's turn on there we go, the layers. You can kind of see. Now what's awesome here is that there's an abbey here, a church building that is currently a Catholic church. And here is the library at St. Gallen. And this library, I mean, look at these pictures of this library. It has so many books. In fact, it has books and things that are still handwritten. It has a lot of records from before the printing press was invented. And so it's a pretty amazing place. And I wanted you to see this spot because there's some history that happens in this area that I thought was worth talking about. So let me hop back out of this scenario if I can, and we'll be back over there later to discuss some more. But here's some of my story that I wanted to share for today. All right, so way back in the early 300s, so this is like 1700 years ago. This is at a time when Christianity is actually only coming, is spreading everywhere. And actually, in the 300s, there was a boy from Cappadocia that was captured by some Germanic tribes. So the Germanic area at the time, they were some wild warrior people who were passionate, and but also, from that day until now, they've always loved their beer and their sausage, and they were very warring people up there at the time. Anyway, they captured this Ulfilas boy from Cappadocia, who happens to be a Christian. And as a believer, instead of just being like, oh, woe is me, and giving up, he began serving his masters and his people and started sharing with them the gospel. And to the best of his ability, from Latin and Greek, what he knew, he began translating scriptures over into German, the Germanic language, for them to understand. And many came to Christ. And so he was baptizing people into Christ. Okay, so this is my very first baptism things, right? There's baptisms happening. People are coming to Christ. So this is exciting. This is a good thing. This is an exciting thing to even just think about, is that we have people coming to know Jesus, people that did not know about Jesus. Now, after Ulfilas had been there for a season, this fellow named Constantine became the emperor of Rome. And he, because of the way that he conquered Rome, wanted to make it a Christian nation. So he was trying to bring his political power and his, you might even say, his war ability, his prowess in battle, all combined into one thing. And so he wanted all the churches also to be united. So it's not just Constantine. There's a whole lot of people involved in this. But at this time, religious beliefs, the doctrines of the church, and everything was being brought into unity. So trying to bring things closer together. Well, what this did is that Ulfilas was outside of this. So in his day, he would have ended up being called a heretic. So even though he had gone back down in like 341, had actually become ordained as a church leader, and had gone back and was serving the people there, and had done a lot of translation work from Latin and Greek into German. Even all this was happening, he was kind of being called a heretic. So he was sort of outside the established church as we go later into the 300s. And as the centuries start going by, people that had been baptized by him and were following Christ through his methods and his his missionary efforts, these people were considered outside the fold of the official church, even though they believed in Jesus and had been baptized in the name of Christ. All right, this is important for the bit of news here, because we continue to go on here. Ulfilas is followed by other people. So there are other people now as the church continues to spread. And so we have and I'm going to butcher some of these names, but we have Remigus that is over in Reims, what is now France. And he at one point, there is a Germanic tribal, or someone trying to conquer the German tribes, a fellow by the name of Clovis, who happens to be married to a Christian woman. Clovis doesn't love Jesus or the church or anything at the time. However, there comes a point where his son is very ill, and through prayer is restored, and then he's in a battle, and as a last-ditch effort, he prays to the God of his Christian wife and wins the battle. And so he is like, I'm going to become a Christian. So he goes off to Remigus and says, I want to be baptized. And so he gets baptized. All of his men get baptized. So thousands of people are now baptized. And so then he heads off into the Germanic tribes with his now Christian sword, and is trying to conquer the tribes. And as he conquers them, he baptizes them. This is a little bit different than Ulfilas, who comes as a slave and a servant and shares with them the love of Christ. It's just a little different, okay? But by the time, now 300 years later, we have this fellow by the name of Gall of Down from Ireland. He's an Irish Catholic missionary, and in 612, he comes to St. Gallen, the city that we just looked at a minute ago. He comes, looks, and starts a monastery there, and it starts a Christian work there. By 716, so now think, 300s, 716, we're 400 years after Ulfilas first brought the gospel to the Germanic tribes. All right, 716, Boniface comes. He's also like an Irish Catholic missionary. He comes to St. Gallen area, that whole area, but he begins to work hard to clean up Ulfilas's haphazard Christianity. So everyone's been using, the German translations that Ulfilas had, but the Catholic Church officially is using Latin right now. And so there's just a lot of haphazard Christianity from Boniface's perspective. And so he's trying to help clean this up. So Boniface actually puts in power a fellow by the name of Pepin the Short, to rule Germanic Christendom. And it's Pepin's son, Karl, who then leads after Pepin the Short. Now, Karl, we know him as Charlemagne. And Karl is a very strong fighter, but he's doing it, if you remember, way starting back with Clovis, we had the Christian sword. So you come in, you conquer the tribe, they surrender to you, you baptize them, and now they're Christians, and you force them to follow the rites of the church. Oh my. So this is a different kind of baptism altogether, is it not? However, this continues, and so Karl ends up going down to Rome in 800, the year 800, Christmas time, on Christmas Day, while there's thousands of people there, in the cathedral there, what we would call Pope Leo and Charlemagne, they come in and they're there together, and Pope Leo makes the announcement, or together they make the announcement. I don't know exactly how the announcement worked, but basically Karl is the emperor, not just of the Germanic people, but of the Holy Roman Empire, and Leo is its religious head. So there's Pope Leo, and then there's Karl. And so you might say this is something of a separation, because you have the sword, and then you have Pope Leo. And I don't know, you can study these people on your own. What follows is what I want to discuss, because there's a bit of something here where this establishes Rome, where they don't have to be subservient to Byzantium and the powers over there. And so What happens now is that we have Charlemagne coming back, and he continues to now cover the whole Germanic areas and making sure that everyone is submitted to him and that everyone is part of the church. And so that means that instead of praying or hearing in their own language, as Ulfilas had put things in place, he continues the work of Boniface, where he's trying to bring unity and make everyone the same. So now they're saying the Lord's Prayer in Latin instead of their own language. In fact, Karl's language, or Charlemagne's language, according to historians, would have been similar to the language I grew up speaking in the Pennsylvania Dutch Amish communities. And so we have Charlemagne actually, at one point he had 4,500 people massacred in one day because they refused to follow him into his baptism and into the church. He had 4,500 people massacred. And this was his statement, like, you follow Christ the way I tell you to, or you will be killed. And so we see that there is a certain level of power that is being wielded, and there's baptism happening. So this is kind of if you think about it from a Christian perspective, this is kind of a sad chapter where Christ and the character of Christ is not being upheld very well. And so they have their doctrinal reasons why people need to join them, and why, if they're not joining them, they are outside the fold and are therefore wrong. However, there's problems here. So moving forward, we're now in this was in 800, and then we get to 970, and so the buildings that I showed you a minute ago, we're not there yet. The library that's there now, I think, was built in like the 1700s. Maybe the abbey, most of those buildings were built in the 1700s. But at the time, in 970, there was already a library there in St. Gallen. And so you had, it had started out as an Irish Catholic kind of monastery, eventually became a St. Benedictine monastery. But the library, so there was a fire in 970 that burned the church building and the other building, the abbey that was around there, but the library was saved. And for me, that was an encouraging thing, because I still sometimes grieve the loss of the library in Alexandria to fire. And so when I was first reading this, I was like, wait, what? There's a fire? Oh no. And so I'm beginning to have anxiety for a fire that happened, over 1,000 years ago. But the library was saved. And so what that means is, in the library still to this day, we still have documents and books and things that were handwritten at that time. So we have stuff from the 800s, from the 600s. So there's a lot of things there. That's pretty amazing, if you ask me. So now we move forward, and we're getting to the point in the 1500s. So the church was largely successful, and from the 800s all the way to the 1500s, so you have like a 700-year period where, for the most part, the church was normal. Everything was kind of in place. There were little movements here and there at different times to try at reform. There were some people who insisted on talking more about who Christ was, knowing his word. The entire time, if you think about it, in the library at St. Gall, there were the documents in the proper languages for people to understand. So just think for a moment. You have the cathedral going on. You have the St. Gall happening. The library there. And so anybody that had access to the library could go back and read old accounts and old books and find out things. But they were mostly not able to read, so they were over next door listening to whatever was being told them in the cathedral or the church at the time. And so they were following what was happening in the church. And this is an important note, because a little bit later, when people like Martin Luther came along, they went back to the libraries and said, look what is here. And Martin Luther was only one of many. Okay, so I wanted to actually now show you, because at St. Gallen, that place that I was showing you a minute ago, it's still there. So let me see if I can set this up again. Here we go. Sometimes I am better at this technology than other times. But let's see, right there. I got me up in the corner. We're back over to our map. And if you look here, let's zoom back in again. So here I am, St. Gallen. If I go to the website, it's an active Roman Catholic Church today, and you can click on the live stream, and you can make sure the audio is turned on. This is a live stream from last Sunday, March 19th, and if I click play, it says it's going to start in a minute. So I'm going to actually jump into the service where the music is already playing and they are speaking, and this is important to the story. So here we go. I'm going to go into about 3.5 minutes, and you get to hear a moment of what's going on last Sunday.
Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Der Friede sei mit euch.
Und mit deinem Geist.
Ich begrüße Sie alle herzlich zu diesem Sonntagsgottesdienst hier in der Kathedrale oder zu Hause mit uns betend verbunden.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause that
Wir feiern
and come back. Here we go. So if you notice, we're in that beautiful cathedral, which was probably built somewhere in the 1700s, I believe. But we have a church service going on in German, which is the language of the people over there today. And so all the work that was happening in the 1500s made a huge impact. Oh, I have William Force here. Hi, William. I'm busy doing a coffee talk. What are you doing today? What? You were playing. I see you have a little dude there. Okay.
They only got socks on.
Yeah. Well, I'm giving a coffee talk. I'll be finished soon. You're gonna stay here with me, or you're gonna go back upstairs?
And the sisters.
All right. You can sit here. All right. So the church service we just heard from last Sunday was actually in German. It's a language of the common people over there now, which in the 1500s, that would have been a Latin service, if there was a service there at all. And so Ulrich Zwingli and Martin Luther and a bunch of these other guys, they began working on making it a more common thing to get the language of the Bible and the language of the church into the language of the common people instead of being stuck in Latin. And so there was a lot of upheaval that happened here. This is important to the story. Well, we get eventually to in the around 1525, you have the Weavers Union or the Weavers Guild in St. Gallen there, and there is quite a bit of these they kind of rule the town, the city council, everything. And so when everything's happening over in Zurich with Zwingli, and so even in St. Gallen, the city council becomes Protestant. All of this is happening. Well, we have a young man, so the leader of the Weavers Guild, his son's name is I wrote it down because Wolf Olliman. So we have Wolf Olliman, and then we have another guy by the name of Johannes Kessler. And so Johannes Kessler is actually on his way to Wittenberg, but he stops in a small inn named the Black Bear Inn. And while he's there, as you do, you chat with the other people that are there. Well, there's this group of knights that's there for the evening, and they're spending the night there. Well, one of the knights is actually Martin Luther, who is traveling in disguise because of the times and the trouble he's already in with the church. Well, Kessler and Luther have this conversation, and their conversation goes deep fast because of shared things. So Kessler goes home and starts in his house what we would call a Bible study. And so, are you trying to see where you are in the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kessler in his house starts having there in St. Gallen a Bible study where he will get people together and they will read the scriptures together and talk about them. And so coming home from college or university or whatever it was at the time, I think he actually was studying to become a monk, Wolf Olliman comes in there one night, visits Kessler's house, and they are reading the actual scripture that I read from Romans. They're reading that about baptism. And of course, they're not reading it in just Latin anymore. They're now reading it in the different languages, because this is a time when when the Bible's being translated. And so as Oleman hears this, and he hears about the burial of being buried with Christ through baptism, this is a huge thing for him. It brings a lot of conviction to his heart, and he wants to. He starts thinking, "What about me? I have not been baptized like this." And so, if at the time, as a baby, he would have been baptized in the church, but he was like not. He was thinking about verse 4, Romans 6, verse 4. Let me just read it one more time. It says, "Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life." And so later, there was some business happening back in Zurich. Wolf Oleman is traveling along. I believe he's with Kessler. I'm not sure. They meet Conrad Grebel, and they start talking. And as Conrad is talking with him, Wolf is just like, "You've got to baptize me." He just is so insistent. And so he ends up just stripping off right there and jumping in the river. In fact, he took off more clothes than Conrad Grebel was expecting, because later there were journals written or letters written where he just stripped down, and we went into the river, and he was baptized by immersion, which, if you know the Anabaptist circles today, that's pretty cool to think about the differences in mode of baptism and what that means. All right, but that's beside the point, though. But he goes down and is baptized. Well, Oleman comes back. He brings other Anabaptist leaders to St. Gallen. There is an afternoon where they bring in where they have an Anabaptist speaker, basically, and they're out there and they're just talking at such a level that everyone is able to understand what baptism is supposed to be, what it means to follow Christ, what it's supposed to look like if you love Jesus. And so as they're doing that, there is a very big move. We would call it a revival. And there's Cedar Creek is nearby there, and there in St. Gallen. And it said, the reports are, it was like a parade. There were so many hundreds of people headed down to the river, Cedar Creek there. And there were 3 Anabaptist men among them, and they were baptizing people. And so many people got baptized that the city council was really concerned. Now, it says that a lot of there was a lot of women and children that were being baptized, but also there were men. And it created such a stir that the city council met to talk about this. What do we do with all these baptisms? And their biggest concern, now that they were Protestant, was that there is a proper way for people to be baptized. And they had wanted people to be baptized within the church, not outside the church. So they were concerned about that. And so they, instead of just immediately starting to kill people like Charlemagne had done, or doing, if they disagree with them, they asked them to leave. And so a lot of people left. Wolf Oleman, the young man, he led 100 people over to Moravia. Later, he came back and got a group of 100 Christians or Anabaptists, and was taking them out. And so as they were heading out, he actually got captured at one point and martyred for his faith. But these people were so intent on following Christ, identifying with Christ, being baptized, that even when Wolf Oleman was martyred, he would have called it his third baptism, because what they saw was there is the baptism of the water, the blood, and the Spirit, the water, and the blood. And so you're born again in your heart, you're baptized in the Spirit, you're baptized in water, and then through suffering you identify with Christ. And so for these men, baptism was such a very different thing for them, because it was a life and death matter. And yet many people followed them in baptism. And in thinking about all the ways that in that same area of St. Gallen, how many different ways people were baptized under the urge of the sword, back with Charlemagne and others. And then here is Ulfilas under risk of the sword going, no, I am actually going to get baptized, even if it means I'm going to die. Very different scenario. And so I just think about this moment of what we would call a revival, and how in our day, when we see other people having like a revival, sometimes we question, is it for real? It didn't happen in my church. They should have done that only in the church. And we have a lot of these same questions. And so that was why I asked the question, what does your baptism mean to you? And how do you see Christian baptism? Do you see it as something that has to happen only within the confines of a specific organization, a denomination or something? Or what is baptism? How do you see it? And has your baptism, in your case, would you identify more with the Germans who were baptized under Charlemagne, who were like, okay, if you're going to be part of us, you've got to be baptized, and it's kind of held over your head, and so you're like, okay, you go get baptized? Or is it more like in the days of the revival in the 1520s, where you go, I believe in Jesus, I must be baptized, and the powers that be are like, don't do that. If you do that, you won't be part of us anymore. And you're like, but I have to follow Jesus. Which way do you identify more with your baptism? Were you trying to just appease the powers that be? Or were you actually saying, I don't care what anyone says, I've got to follow Jesus? Because I think it's important for us to consider what our baptism means to us. So those are some of my thoughts about baptism and about what God is doing even in our day, and realizing that anytime anyone anywhere comes to Christ, there usually is a long history of other people that have been obedient to Christ that's been leading up to that moment. So these are some of my thoughts for today. Baptism, what does it mean to you? That's my talk, my story. I'll see you guys next week. Here we go. My transition wasn't working correctly. Here we go.